It's the internet. You're busy. Let's do this. I'm Jeff Grubb. I write for GamesBeat.com. I'm now doing a show for Giant Bomb. I also run something called Jeff Grubb's Game Mess on Twitter, which is kind of like a calendar that tells people basically what's happening with summer game events or gaming events throughout the year. And you know what? We're going to start right there. I said we're busy. Let's do this. Let's actually jump into something immediately. EA Play, right now, actually, the embargo just went up. It announced today that they are going to do multiple events throughout July for basically what is going to be their E3 show. That's going to start with, here, I got the rundown right here. Why don't I just bring it up so you can all see it? And then afterwards, I'll do more of an intro. But I didn't want to miss out on this opportunity to get those hot embargoes. This is EA Play Live. They're going to start with something on July 8th at 10 a.m. called The Future of First-Person Shooters, which, all right, so I guess these are going to be kind of like panels. I don't know what to expect from that. I would imagine you have like DICE and maybe, Respawn and a few other come on there and talk about their games and talk about what they're doing. Then on July 13th at 10 a.m. Pacific time, they're going to have EA Hearts Independent Studios. I would imagine to see a lot of Joseph Fares at this thing. Joseph Fares coming off It Takes Two, which was very successful for EA. And yeah, that worked out very well for them. So I would imagine like we're probably going to do more of that. On July 19th, they're going to have Madden NFL 22 All Access Scouting, how the community is shaping in Madden NFL 22. And then I think there's going to do more EA Sports on July 20th. So right here on this image right here that just says Madden NFL 22. On the email we got sent, there is more stuff happening on July 20th, and it just says more EA Sports. So I'm sure that's going to be, hey, Bacalar, don't worry. I'm sure it's going to be all NHL for you. Then July 22nd is actual EA Play Live. That's at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Okay, let me get this off of here. And now let's actually talk. Let's vibe, everybody. This is GrubbSnax. It is a new show about gaming news, but you get to ask questions, and I'll take those questions at the end of the show. You can send them in. There's on the giantbomb.com/chat page where you are watching this. You can hit there's a thing right at the top. Ask a question. Click that. Send me a question. Just use it for questions you actually want me to see, because I don't want it to kind of clog things up. You'll see it's going to come up on the screen. So yeah, let's respect that and just kind of send in stuff that you think that would be good for me to answer for this show. In addition to that, though, I plan to try to bring in topics each week where we could talk about what's happening. Sometimes breaking news, sometimes news that we will break here. That won't happen every week. It's not like a thing where I could just press a button and more snacks come down for everybody. The GrubbSnax will be intermittent, but we are going to have a few today. And I'll get to those in a moment. Those are going to involve an update on the Hideo Kojima story that I've been talking about recently. And there will be an update on the Dead Space story that has been going around. First, though, I want to thank Giant Bomb for having me. I want to thank GamesBeat for letting me do this. I write over at GamesBeat. They're letting me do this video stuff over on Giant Bomb. And I think that's super nice. I also want to thank you, everybody, for tuning in. It's really nice that you're going to take your time out of your day to watch this. I think everybody, I think a lot about video games, and that's kind of what the show is going to be about. Hey, I think about this stuff a lot. Let's talk about that. But that doesn't make me very unique among this audience. You and I'm sure both think a lot about video games. But I think that's why it's going to be good. This is going to be kind of conversational. You guys will bring ideas and we'll discuss it and we'll say, hey, does that make sense? And we'll try to figure it out. And I also don't have all the answers. I think the most frequent thing you'll hear from me when you ask something is I don't know, because I don't know everything. I barely know anything, I feel like. But I think that's also okay, because again, this is just about us trying to figure stuff out. When we do know information, let's talk about it, but it's not going to just be like, hey, we are putting this stuff out there to spoil things. Let's try to understand what's happening and why. And yeah, I think that does it for the preamble. Oh, yes, this first episode is free right now. You're watching on giantbob.com/chat, or you're watching the VOD later. Future episodes will be premium, so if you want to do that, I think it's giantbomb.com/upgrade. So please check that out. Okay, let's get into Kojima. I have here on my little rundown, it just says Kojima, and then the next line is letter of intent, and that's the story. Hideo Kojima and Microsoft have signed a letter of intent. This is new. This is what I'm bringing to the show. I've talked about this story a lot. they have moved to what is basically a key milestone in the negotiations between the two parties to ensure this deal gets done. The letter of intent basically says both sides in good faith are going to see this through as long as the certain criteria is met, but that criteria is basically pretty basic stuff, and now the lawyers on each side are just hashing out the details. I think that this is something that probably will get officially closed and announced by the end of the year. But things, I think this is going to be a pretty big move for Microsoft. And what does that mean? I don't know anything about whether or not Microsoft's going to invest money directly in Kojima Productions. I think that's maybe on the table. There's some weirdness there because Japan is weird for any Western company trying to come and invest in Japan. It's challenging. But I think there's a possibility that they might figure it out in this instance. At the very least, though, the publishing deal would be for Kojima and Kojima Productions to come in and make a new cloud-based video game. What is that game? I don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows. I've asked around a couple of places, and the first answer everyone gives is no one knows, and most people don't believe Kojima even fully knows at this point. I think that's funny, but also that's not the point. The point isn't to, Kojima has this really good idea, the specific idea that we want to greenlight. It's not about that. It is about enabling Kojima to do something with the technology that Microsoft has, and Microsoft wants to see this through, and that Kim Swift, and I've reported this separately on GamesBeat, that when they hired Kim Swift, I had heard that hire was specifically about ensuring that Kojima would have someone to work with to figure out the cloud and be able to make this game a reality. So they're putting the pieces into place. Everyone seems to believe the deal will go through, and the letter of intent makes it very unlikely that the deal is going to fall apart at this point. Still could, but the letter of intent like I said, a key milestone in ensuring that this thing becomes a reality. What does that mean for Kojima working with PlayStation, right? That's the thing that I think a lot of fans, especially PlayStation fans or Kojima fans, a lot of times those are one and the same. They worry what does this mean for that? I don't think it would necessarily it would not prohibit Kojima from working with PlayStation. Microsoft would not have a non-compete clause or something in this deal, at least as far as I understand it. And, we know for a fact that right now Kojima is still working with PlayStation on Death Stranding Director's Cut right now at this moment. Now, is that something he wouldn't be able to do after he signs this deal? I personally still don't think so. And from what I understand, from what I've heard, if he wanted to go make other deals with other companies and expand his team, and I think as long as he was meeting, the key milestone markers, again, I'm using that word too much, key milestone markers for production with Microsoft is not going to stop him from doing that. So he would always be free to go ahead and do a weird conspiracy theory with, a Netherlands studio in Amsterdam, abandoned. What was that? Sorry, I shouldn't even brought it up. Okay. Second big story that I wanted to bring to you is Dead Space, and it's less of a big story because everyone apparently knows this one already. I was teasing it on my podcast, and we didn't say the name exactly, and yet immediately that weekend Dead Space started trending, and then Eurogamer did a story, Jamatsu did a story, and a person named Jeff Gersman on the Giant Bombcast was like, I heard it's a reboot. And I'm sitting there nodding along while listening to that episode. It's a reboot. It's a revival reboot, but think of it also like a remake. And I think the point is that it's going to be very similar to, here's what I think happened. Electronic Arts was like, hey, we're scared of making single player campaigns. We're going to do all live service stuff. And then they looked over at Capcom, who is doing stuff like Resident Evil 2 Remake and having huge success. And they say, hey, we could do exactly that with Dead Space. Why aren't we? I think they're going to do exactly that with Dead Space. I think Dead Space Remake is going to look and feel a lot like that. It's going to have modern visuals. I think it's going to be very impressive when people see it, and it's also going to not try to be a one-to-one recreation. This is not a remaster. It is a chance for them to also reboot the franchise, because if you remember in I think Dead Space 3 DLC, Visceral, before they got shut down, were like, hey, let's just destroy this entire universe, and they killed every single human in the universe in that game. So that's then not exactly something that you can build a sequel onto. I'm sure you could find creative ways around that or whatever, but instead they are going back to the beginning, and they're like, hey, let's take the bones of Dead Space 1, let's remake that. And as we look around the series and we see other areas where things could make sense, let's bring some stuff from like Dead Space 2 in here and kind of beef up the gameplay mechanics and the story of Dead Space 1 to make sure we have a very strong foundation going forward, so that when we make a new Dead Space 2, we have something to build on. And I think that is very, I think it's something very likely we will hear about at EA Play. That things change. This is where like there's going to be caveats and people get frustrated with this stuff, but it's just the reality. If you don't want to hear about this stuff, you don't want to worry about the caveats, just don't watch the show at all, would be my recommendation. But the caveats are, these things could change. This is what happened with Mass Effect Legendary Edition last year. I said it was going to get announced in October, right? And then they moved it. And I said they moved it, but they moved it, and it was frustrating for them. It looked bad for me, but that's the kind of thing that could happen here as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Last thing I wanted to talk about before I start getting to questions, and I see them coming in, and again, if you want to ask a question, and we're going to do a long question and answer session. That stuff can go for a long time, so feel free to send them in. Any ideas you might have, let's talk about them. But the ask a question button there at the top of the page, click that if you have a question you want me to answer, and I'll answer that in the next section. So, this morning, PlayStation announced that it acquired another studio, Nixxes, and Nixxes is a European studio, and I think that's part of it. Like, I think it's a European studio that specializes in doing ports of games to PC, from console to PC, and I think that when Jim Ryan was looking around saying, hey, can we find someone to just do that so we don't have to contract out every single time we want to do this? I think Nixxes being in Europe probably helped with that, because Jim Ryan loves Europe. I think we can all admit that Jim Ryan loves Europe. And he looked around and saw a studio that was like ready and willing, and was probably saying, hey, yeah, we're ready to be acquired. We are at the top of our game, and we know that you need this really bad. And you don't want it to start from scratch every single time you want to port a game. You want to build this into your workflow going forward, so that maybe you could do this stuff quicker in the future. That's an option. I'm not saying that's what this is. I'm not saying that like God of War 2 is going to come to PC like a year later. I still don't know like how that would change. I'm sure there's a lot of business considerations instead of just like technical hurdles that they're worried about there. But if they wanted to release a game on PC more quickly, Nixxes seems like an acquisition that would be able to enable that. And I think it's, I think this is a company that I've seen its logo in a lot of places. It's very busy. And so I think that's the other side of it, where this studio, when Sony had a project that said, hey, can we make this game go to PC? Nixxes a lot of times could have been like, hey, we're very busy. If you want to be moved to the top of the queue, you have to pay a premium. And at a certain point, I'm sure it just made sense to sort of just buy the cow instead of trying to rent it every time. And especially as these studios, I think, are becoming more and more rare in terms of they're busier than ever. These studios are making more games themselves. They are always looking to expand, and they're always looking for other partners. And I believe that this studio working exclusively with PlayStation going forward is going to make a lot of sense. All right. Okay, so I see a bunch of questions. I think it's time to get to that stuff. Let's do that. Let me try the little Stream Deck. Let me see if this is going to work. Hey, look at that. It worked. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down. I think it's going from bottom to top. So here's one from Eric Von Wolf, which you guys actually can't see. Sorry, I got a camera in the way. How long will the average GrubbSnax episode be estimated? So I'm aiming from like 60 minutes to like 90 minutes. It's going to depend a lot on the conversations that we have starting now. So like we're about 15 minutes in right now. That's about how long I expect most of these early sections to take, where if I bring some news, if I bring a topic, we'll talk about it for like 15 minutes. I think it's about the maximum you can go with a monologue like that before you start interacting with people, before people start zoning out. So, obviously if there's a really big important topic, if there's like a lot of news, it'll go longer. But then I expect the question section now to go for a long time, where I'll look at the questions you have, answer them, and we'll talk about them each for a very long time. And then that'll go for at least 60 minutes. And then after that, we'll kind of see how we're doing. We'll do a check. We'll check the gas tank and see how old Jeffrey boy is doing. All right. Any word on Mario? Oh, this is going to jump up on me, isn't it? Maybe I should work the other way. Any word on Mario Striker games, on a Mario Strikers game being worked on soon? So that would be, it's not Nintendo Software Technology. Is it Left Field? I can't remember the name. It's a studio. It's the Luigi's Mansion studio that makes those games. There's no word that I've heard, and I think that rhymed. I'm sorry. There's no word on that, but that doesn't mean... I think it makes some sense, but Nintendo's been spacing out their sports games, and Luigi's Mansion did very well, Luigi's Mansion 3, and I think that studio's in a position where they'll probably try to figure out another way to do another Luigi's Mansion, like in the next, in the next couple of years, and then what do they do on the side in between that, which I think they probably release something in between, but is Mario Strikers the right choice? Like, they're definitely going to make another Luigi's Mansion. When they're given a choice about what to make in between now and then, does Mario Strikers make the most sense? I think it's at the top of the list, but like, who knows? There could be someone at that studio that's like holding a torch for Punch-Out, which is another game that studio worked on, and maybe they bring that back. I would love a Punch-Out personally, but I think that Mario Strikers is a game that might have more of an appeal. It's a game that you hear a lot about when people talk about their favorite Mario sports games, so I think it's possible. Okay. From Tolkoto. Will Square Enix fix the font in the Pixel remasters, or do they just not care? Listen, this is Mike Minotti, my co-host on GamesBeat Decides. Mike, I don't think they care, man. I'm sorry. You tell me. You're the fan. Like, do you feel that they care about you enough to care about your eyes while you're playing this game? When I look at that, that looks to me like they're afraid of old fonts for some reason, old pixel fonts. I think they think that they've heard one, or maybe someone at Square Enix is just like, no, that hurts my eyes. That old stuff hurts my eyes. I just make something look normal. It's text. People only care about the way the game looks. They don't care about the way the font looks. But it looks real bad, and I hope they fix it. But I don't have high hopes that they will. I mean, what did they ever fix the way that the Steam releases looked before they just delisted them, or that they're about to delist them? So, no, I don't think so. Do you have any more info about the Firaxis Marvel XCOM type game? No. So when that happened, that 2K leak happened on Reddit. And what I did is I was like, hey, someone, is this leak real? And they were like, yeah. And here's a few more details, but not like a lot more details on what was happening there. So I was able to confirm that all the stuff in that 2K leak was accurate. But as for like when this game is coming out, where you'll be able to play it, when we're going to get it announced, I haven't been able to dig in that stuff yet. I'll look a little bit more, but I guessed that we would see it at E3 because Take-Two had their panel, which we did not know was just going to be a panel at the time. And so I assumed that we were here about E3, so I didn't look into it that much, feeling like, why would I try to go out there and spoil this? We're going to hear about it in a week. So I guess now that we haven't heard about it, maybe it will be time to kind of just check in on it and see how it's doing. It's a game that I'm very interested in. I hope we hear more about soon. How do you feel? It's hot. You know. From Mops, Tony Hawk remake on Steam when? Is it not on Steam? I thought it was on Steam. I guess it's not. Oh, is it on Epic? It's on Epic. Okay. So like a year later, right? That's how those usually go. They usually take a full year. Okay, from the Digitalistic. What's up with Sony and the event people think is happening? So that's a good question. I haven't heard anything still. Last year I heard a date real early. I haven't heard a date for Sony yet. I also haven't necessarily been digging too much just because getting Sony information right now is kind of hard. They've really locked down stuff pretty fiercely. But a lot of people seem convinced that July 8th is happening. And to me, that just like, there's going to be something in July or August. That just makes sense. They're not going to let that time go by without telling us what's happening this fall. They're not Nintendo. Sony has a marketing scheme in its head, and it's going to, it's going to activate that at some point. And it's just the question is, are they ready by early July, or do they need more time. So I guess we're already in July now, July 1st, so a week from now. That means we'd probably hear about this. If this is a big event, if this is a big 90-minute event, like some people are saying, they will tell us by the end of this week. So I don't think we're going to have to wait long to know if it's real. Personally, I still don't know. Okay. What are the chances they talk about the future of true Titanfall during that first-person shooter panel? That's from the Match 328, and I think the chances are pretty low, personally, right now, because, and that's based on a few things. They're very busy with Apex Legends still, and then the other side is very busy with Jedi Fallen Order and Fallen Order 2, which I don't think they're going to announce that here at this E3. I don't think. Maybe they do. That could have changed since I last heard. I think they're going to start talking about that game next year, and that means does Respawn really have the bandwidth then to start working on Titanfall 3. I think maybe it comes up, right? This is a panel where they're asked questions by a moderator, and they know that if they were like in a complete open like session and we're getting questions from the audience, that someone would bring up Titanfall 3, and they might feel like obligated to touch on it. We might get it mentioned in that way, but as for telling us anything about the real true future of that side of the franchise, I think it's unlikely we hear anything about that anytime soon. It's Magical Neil. Any thoughts on the PS Store discourse going on related to some Kotaku reporting? So yeah, this came up yesterday, and this was based on a couple people on Twitter who are publishers of basically indie games or developers of indie games, and they were saying that they make less money on PlayStation than they do even on Xbox or Nintendo, and they were being coy about it. They weren't using exact platform names, but if you looked at their pie charts, I'm pretty sure the red was Nintendo, the blue was PlayStation, and the green was Xbox, and black was Steam. And the one pie chart that really stuck out to me was the publisher who publishes a lot of indie games. The PlayStation section was even smaller than Steam, and the Xbox section was almost as big as Switch. Which if you know anything about indie games, they do very well on Switch. People who have Switches right now, they like games a lot. They're spending a lot of money on games. They're buying multiple games all the time. They go in the eShop and they look for new games. Like this is just, and so indie games do very well on the Switch, better than anywhere else. So I was actually more surprised that Xbox was so close to Switch. I'm like, how does that, like, that didn't seem possible. I think that's, and I went back and looked at a Shovel Knight pie chart, and this is stuff I put on in a story yesterday on GamesBeat, but I looked at a pie chart from 2018 for Shovel Knight, and Xbox was pretty small, and this was Xbox One. Xbox was pretty small, and then PlayStation 4 was like 9%, and then the Wii U was like 14%. And the 3DS was like 12% or something like that. And I think they might have put the Switch in there, and the Switch was already at like 10%. So yeah, Nintendo platform's very good for indies. You could argue like, oh, there wasn't a lot to play, but I wouldn't buy that because I think the Wii U had a lot of games. I think that audience just really jives with that. So basically the point was, though, that these developers and publishers were trying to make is that publishing games on Sony is a challenge, and then once you're on there, it is a black box in terms of being able to figure out how to make the game a success. And their argument was there's not a lot of tools for understanding like who's getting the game, who wants to see your game. There's not a lot of tools for advertising. It's just, and then basically you're not empowered as a developer to figure out this platform yourself. And so then what does PlayStation have? Well, they have these managers, and the managers of each game is determined by, and this is according to them, this is not based on my own reporting, this is based on what they said on Twitter yesterday, that the managers for each of these games are determined by an evaluation process that is also a black box, that people do not understand what criteria is being used to determine like the final evaluation of a game. But that final evaluation determines how much resources Sony gives your game, and that includes like how much attention from this manager and how much like the best placement that you get on the PlayStation Store. And then if you wanted, if you want better placement, you have to pay for it. And I think a lot of people focused on having to pay for that placement, but stores, I mean, you got to pay for better placement in Kroger, I would imagine that's how it works at Kroger. So I think it's probably how it works at PlayStation and Xbox and everything else as well. So the tougher side for me, like, okay, paying for placement is one thing. I think Jess Corden from Windows Central was saying, I couldn't find anywhere where it says that Microsoft does that same thing. I would bet that Microsoft lets you pay to get better placement in the store. But the issue for me was that does sound frustrating, where if you are trying to publish a game on PlayStation and you feel like you don't have the tools to handle it yourself and you're not getting answered, like they were saying, it takes months to get answers from these managers on the PlayStation side. That sounds like a very frustrating experience where you have a huge platform of people playing games. A console with 150 million players, you hear that all the time, and yet you're selling less on there than you do on Steam, where Steam does have a lot of people, but not a lot of people on Steam just play free-to-play games. So when you see like 70 million people using Steam or whatever, a lot of those are just there for the free-to-play games, and so it's not a lot of people spending money like it is on PlayStation. And so yeah, I get that frustration. Now, I also saw some other indie publishers saying, hey, if you can't find out how to make a game succeed on PlayStation, you should probably be thinking twice about publishing other people's video games. And I think there's probably something to that as well, where there are clear indie successes on Steam, or on PlayStation, excuse me. And so, at a certain point, why are you not succeeding? Like, okay, yeah, maybe the platform is more challenging than the other ones, but we have seen indies succeed on PlayStation, so we know it's not an impossibility. Maybe it's a little bit more challenging, but the size of the audience, you would think, would mean like you would still be able to find some people who want to buy this game on there. So I don't think this is necessarily all on PlayStation, and I also don't think Sony has a lot of motivation to change, right? Because this is what I wrote in my story yesterday, that Sony's been more consistently profitable now than it ever has in its past. We're in a console generation transition, and traditionally, its revenues would have plummeted, its profitability would have like turned to negative, it would have gone into the red, and now it's not seeing that at all. It's like making more money this year than it did at the height of the PlayStation 3 or even like the PlayStation 2, and so Sony's looking around and saying, hey, we got there through services, by making money off of Fortnite, and by making really giant blockbusters. It's not because of indie games. And we're sorry this is frustrating to you, but we got to look out for number one. You can get our games on our service. We have such a huge audience. You seem to keep putting games on our service. Like, if it's so challenging, I mean, you still do it. So if people want to buy these games, they can. I don't think Sony has a lot of motivation to change that. It doesn't mean that they shouldn't, and I get the frustrations of publishers who feel like they are being left out of the success of PlayStation. But yeah, I think this is kind of just where it's going to be for a while, unless these developers, publishers build up enough noise to kind of get people talking a little bit more. Okay, let's see here. Just Right said, I had to 100% Balan Wonderworld because I lost a bet. How do I cope? You don't. I had to play that game because Tokoto in the chat made me review it, and I got to the end, and then it was like, oh, and now here's the third level in each stage unlocked to go back to, and I put the game down. I never touched it again. I'm sure I'll get back to it at some point as some sort of self-punishment thing. But yeah, you don't cope. You have to. Here's the good news. Just Right. There's a novelization of Balan Wonderworld that I said I would read if someone bought for me, and someone bought it for me. So just be happy you're not doing that. From Sir Link, is the Nixxes acquisition by PlayStation going to hurt Square Enix Japanese PC ports going forward? I don't know. It's possible. I bet they'll figure it out. I bet that I don't know. I actually didn't read the full blog, and I apologize for that. But I wonder if there's a possibility that Nixxes could still take on some stuff for Square Enix, because PlayStation and Square Enix are still so close. They'll figure it out. It could slow down some of the ports a little bit going forward. From Jeff, hey, which other Warner studios do you think are for sale, and where do you think they'll go? So I think that most of them are probably like up for discussion. You always say this, Gerstmann, that everyone's always talking about buying other companies all the time, and I think that there's like a lot of links between Warner and Microsoft, because Matt Booty used to be at Warner. He's very familiar with like the way those studios work and what they would be good at, even if they didn't come with the IPs. And so I'm sure that he has had a lot of those conversations. Whether that clearly hasn't turned into anything yet, but I still think maybe it could. But I haven't heard anything new since all of those pre-weird E3 rumors, which I always said were just rumors. I never confirmed that I heard anything directly about any of them, but there was rumors about Rocksteady and NetherRealm and all these other ones. And now that stuff's gone real quiet now that E3 is over. But I wouldn't. I mean, I get that Discovery is going to keep Batman. I still don't fully understand how this stuff's going to shake out. But I think like Discovery's going to keep DC and Batman, and then that makes sense to keep Rocksteady and WB Montreal and stuff like that. But does this company really want to be in the game development business going forward? Like it's a big, expensive endeavor that you have to really sort of oversee and kind of micromanage to make sure that it goes well and that it's not going to backfire on you, because these projects can balloon and become very expensive. And then suddenly, a couple years later, you're looking at a balance sheet and you're like, we spent this much and we still don't have this game, still not ready. It's still going to get delayed another year. I'm always wondering, do these companies, these giant conglomerates, really want to be in that business? Because it seems to only really work well if you have dedicated leadership like Microsoft does, or if you are just a video game company like Ubisoft or Nintendo. Obviously, Sony also has that dedicated leadership. So we'll see. As for like where else it could go other than Microsoft, I'm sure that Sony's sniffing around too, but if those studios do not come with IP, they are not very valuable, and they're kind of actually just a headache for a lot of these companies. I think we saw. I'm not going to be able to remember the name of the studio right now, but there was one of the key people from a WB studio just left and started a new team, and he's already doing that. And like, it's like, okay, that's probably going to happen more frequently than these acquisitions. Okay. From Final Dasa on this same topic, it looks like, are those pre-E3 rumors about Xbox buying a couple more studios still in the works, or were those wishful thinking? Here's how it breaks down for me. Like I said, I never heard it directly from any of my sources. What I heard is, I've heard from other people secondhand. You know, a lot of people talk, a lot of leakers kind of get together, and we have our cabal. And over tea, we discuss, you know, whose day we're going to ruin next. And someone mentioned something like, "Oh, the Avalanche deal is done." And and maybe I just haven't heard that. And when I heard before E3 was, "Hey, when I was there, no one was talking about acquisitions at all." And this was a week before E3. So for me, it's like hard to believe. But that doesn't mean, like, just because I don't believe something, just because I haven't heard it, doesn't mean it's not happening. And I'm hesitant to say it drifts into wishful thinking, but because we clearly know that these companies want to be spending money. They want to get this money off their sheets because of inflation. Inflation is going to get pretty intense over the next year. These companies want to spend their money now while it's still worth a lot. The studios want to be bought. This is stuff I've talked about a lot. I should repeat it here because I haven't said it on this show before, because this is the first episode. But there's a lot of reasons why acquisitions make sense right now more than they have in the past, and why they probably won't make so much sense in the future. These companies have a lot of money in their bank accounts. There's not a lot of good places to put it because, yeah, inflation's one thing. So, you know, where are you going to put this money to sort of invest it and see a return on it? Well, interest rates are super low. Some places had negative interest rates through parts of last year. There's just not a lot of good places to put this money right now. So how do you make that money work for you? Buy a studio that could start producing something. That's why the Minecraft thing always made so much sense for Microsoft. They had that $2.5 billion, whatever it was, just sitting in the bank, not really getting any interest. And instead they could buy Minecraft. And now every time someone buys Minecraft and that game makes like so much money per day, it was making way more money per day than the interest Microsoft was getting on that money in the bank account. So that money was working for them in a way that made a lot of sense. All that stuff is more true now than it has ever been really in the industry. And then on the development side, these developers are worth more money now than they have ever been worth. I think games are selling super well because of the pandemic. And so when you do go present yourself to one of these suitors and you say, "Hey, look at our sales going up, up, up," that looks very good. And it bolsters your reasoning why you are worth more than you've ever been worth before. All that stuff lines up with all these studios being, if they're on the off-frame block, like, I'm sure there are people asking, "Hey, can we buy you?" But whether or not that actually anyone sees that through, that's a whole other thing, and that does require actually like forethought and thinking about how to use these studios properly. And the Warner Brothers studios are specifically pretty confusing. There's some other studios that were up for talks and stuff, but I know we see Sony buying. I'm sure that's going to get Microsoft moving as well. So yeah, we'll see. Okay, let's see. This one's from the Invincible Mark. Why do the next generation sports games with PC versions, Madden and NBA 2K, opt to make the PC version the last gen version? I.e., Madden 22 PC is the equivalent of the PS4 version. It's disappointing to have the last gen versions on better hardware. I'm sure that's just a budgeting thing. I guess I'm not sure. I would guess that's a budgeting thing where, yeah, the PC versions do well. I bet the NBA 2K makes a decent amount of money on PC because basketball is such a global sport. But it's just not worth the upfront investment. They got to make sure the consoles, basically the console versions make way more money. So they're going to invest way more in those, make sure those are good. And then when they're ready to deal with the technical issues of getting the current gen versions to the PC, which you would think wouldn't be that tough, but I bet they have a very smooth pipeline of getting the last gen versions on the PC already set up, so why mess with it? I think it's probably just a case of that. Feature creep, any news about the Konami Bloober thing? So you're going to go talk to Andy Robinson over at Video Games Chronicle, and you're going to ask him because he's got the insight on that. And then special Nick on Twitter, or no, wait, I'm sorry, Nate the Hate. They're the ones that are all in on this Silent Hill stuff. I do not have good insight on that. From what I understand, I would think that this seems like it makes some sense. I mean, Konami working with a team that has made some horror games frequently, and all the fans going, "Oh no, not Bloober." They're like, they make some games, but I don't think they'd be good for a Silent Hill game. And do you think Konami hears that, understands that, cares about that? I doubt it. Okay, the Brown Bear has done it. Do you have any idea what's up with the rumored Switch Pro? So I heard from a good source earlier this year that it was 2022, but that was sort of like, I felt like that was secondhand. Like I was getting like I was getting that stuff secondhand from them, and I think they would, when if I were go to ask about that, they'd be like, yeah, they're like, that's why I didn't publish it, and they would be like, yeah, don't publish that. I'm not a good source for this, but I think there's a lot of smoke, and I think that the one thing you need to keep in mind with a console revision like this is there's a lot of reasons to do it, and once that train starts moving, it's very hard to stop. So there's two factors there. The reasons it's good to do this for Nintendo is they can revise the hardware in such a way that it is actually probably maybe cheaper to make, or at least the same amount of money. And if it's the same amount of money now, when they go to make a new Switch in the future, using basically what is probably going to be the new the new chip process, the new like it's going to be probably on the 6 nanometer, 7 nanometer design process or something, or maybe the Samsung 8 nanometer. And if you don't understand what I'm saying right now, all this matters is the chips will be more efficient, and they're going to use next gen chips basically. And so you want to get the next gen chips into production now, so that when you are ready to move on to the next gen, that line is ready to go, and you could switch that up to the new architecture at that point, and probably still using that same design process, and it'll be cheaper, and then you'll be ready to go, and you've worked out a lot of the kinks already. And this is something that Nintendo's done a lot in the past, and part of the reason that they do this is you know the other side of why it makes sense to do it is that they are selling a lot of stuff directly to Nintendo fans, and then the Nintendo fans sort of let their stuff filter out to everyone else. So if you look at the 3DS, there were 6 3DSs. There was 3DS, 3DS Lite, whatever, and they do that because the hardcore, us, the people watching the show, myself, go out and buy a lot of those new systems, even though it's the same system. But we buy a lot of them, and then either the old one, it might sit in a drawer, but more likely you're going to sell it or hand it off to a sibling or to a family member or to a friend. And when you do that, you create a new user in the ecosystem, someone who might start buying games, maybe. And so what Nintendo's actually doing is using us to subsidize its hardware growth and its install-based growth. It doesn't have to sell hardware to the casual people. Those people will get secondhand systems. They can instead sell hardware to us again, and we'll help facilitate that process. So I think a lot of people understand this. Again, we all think a lot about video games. I'm sure you've thought about this too. It just makes sense. So I think that doing this, I'm surprised there hasn't been another revision since the Lite and the battery one, because Nintendo did one every year with the 3DS. The reason not to do it with the Switch is, I mean, one, NVIDIA's pretty busy working on some other stuff. Getting those new, process lines set up is more difficult now than it's ever been. Obviously, with the chip shortage, even more difficult on top of that. Also, the Switch is sold so well, they haven't had to boost sales through the subsidizing, using us to subsidize hardware growth. But still, it's something Nintendo has done and will want to do again. And so it always has made sense. So do we get one this year? Like, I think that's really what you're asking, because that was the rumor. I still think it's possible that we hear about it and get it before the end of the year. I still think it's possible. That Bloomberg story seemed very confident. There were some other people that I think Eurogamer also sort of echoed it. But I don't think it's going to like line. It's obviously not going to line up with Zelda. Like, they're not going to push it out to go with Zelda at the end of next year now, right? And they don't need to rush it out. If there's any sort of like kink in the road, they don't need to rush it out. Now, the other side of the other thing I mentioned at the beginning of this was, once the train starts moving, it's hard to stop. And that means if they've already begun like any part of the production, if they do have these new chips in production, you just can't stop that. You got to keep it going, because if you get out of line, if you step aside and say, okay, actually, can we pause this because we don't want to do the Switch Pro right now, that's not going to be very good, because you're going to go to the back of the queue, and TSMC or Samsung, whoever ends up doing the production of the actual chips for them, is going to say, okay, we have 50 other customers who will pay the same or more to get your spot, so no problem, go to the back of the line. And then if Nintendo looks around and says, oh, actually, we do want to do a Switch Pro, or even more importantly, if we want to do the next Switch in a couple of years, let's get that going. There could be production issues because they got out of line now. So I think that if they were kind of moving forward with this and they were getting partners involved, if they were getting publishers involved and say, hey, get your games ready, they just sort of cannot pull the rug out from underneath them. Now, I think they can have like a 6-month window where it comes out, oh, does it come out this fall or early next year? That seems realistic. And that's where I think why we've heard so many different things. Why Bloomberg is hearing one thing, why I'm hearing 2022. I think there's still a lot of wiggle room. I do think it's going to happen. I do think at the latest it's 2022. It also just makes sense because the video games need it. The games need it. DLSS would help that system a whole bunch. I think that is almost a certainty for that thing. It's just a matter of time now before we hear about it. Okay. Sorry, went long on that one. It was fun. All right. I'm reading this one from Stern One. Warner Brothers is obviously in a bit of a situation, and I think for many of us here, we are deeply interested in the future of NetherRealm and Mortal Kombat. What kind of purchases could be interested? Okay, so like Microsoft, Iron Galaxy. What have you heard about the future of Mortal Kombat? Here's the one thing I could like. NetherRealm is a very, very successful fighting game studio. They make a lot of money from all of their games. They know how to make a lot of money. They have a lot of clout, and I think that they would be pretty expensive to acquire because of that. But also, they would be highly sought after because they clearly know what they're doing. I just, there's some issues there where it's like, oh yeah, Microsoft might want to acquire that, but like now Microsoft has Mortal Kombat and it's got Killer Instinct, which it said it wants to bring back, and also so now they have multiple fighting games, and now is it going to compete in the fighting game space, like in like the esports side of things with PlayStation? I guess that wouldn't be too much of a consideration for a giant corporation, but it's something they're going to think about. And do they have the appetite to like pursue fighting games that intensely? Maybe not. Now I know, I think it was Phil Spencer on a podcast recently did say they want to bring back Killer Instinct. But that immediately brings up, hey, would Iron Galaxy do that? I think Iron Galaxy is too busy right now to do that. I wonder, I know that they've said that they would love to do it, but I think they're very busy doing other stuff, so I just don't know if they would be available. Maybe that means Microsoft just waits until they are, or something else happens there. I don't know for sure. From Salim Kawar, does Nintendo ever make a brand new console, or is everything from now on simply revisions of the current Switch idea? It's Nintendo. They'll probably make something new. I hope they stick with this Switch formula, but Nintendo doesn't. They get antsy. They want to try new ideas. I think they are getting some of that out of their system with stuff like Labo and Ring Fit Adventure and now Game Builder Garage. And so maybe they'll admit that they could find cool ways to do this on the Switch and just keep updating the Switch. But eventually they're going to say, hey, we have the next pillar of our business, and it's going to be something that's very different from the Switch, and they'll try it. And hopefully they just realize they can also keep the Switch going instead of killing it off. Okay, let's see here. Let's keep going. How's everybody doing? Get laying on the case, says chat. Yeah, we'll get a Nintendo phone. We'll get the Nintendo gauge. Nilak says there's no reason to bring back Killer Instinct. Yeah, I'm not a big fighting game guy, so I think there's some people who really like hold a torch for that series, and some people who don't. Yes, Christian says Lang is too busy feasting. I don't know what specifically Iron Galaxy's working on, but I know they're busy. Okay, let's get back to some of these questions. What happened between Keighley and E3? He talked about this a little bit on one of his Twitter streams, and I think it was basically E3 was talking about. I think he knew E3 was going to be disappointing. I think last year they were probably planning to do an even more disappointing version of what they did this year, and I think he's like, hey, you should just do one big show like my opening night live and get everybody involved, and if it has to happen over a couple of days, that's fine. And then E3 is like, well, we're gonna do panels, and we're gonna let Tommy Tallarico come in here and talk to people about the television because he's gonna pay us money. And not that Keighley doesn't take advertisements as well. I think he does a little bit more non-endemic, but obviously he takes stuff like, obviously he advertises games. But I think that he was just like, I think he just disagreed with the way they presented it. I don't know for sure. You should probably ask him, but the way he explained it, that's what it kind of made it sound like. From Blackheart Vinyl, when you say cloud-based game, and I'm sure this is about Kojima, do you mean only playable as a streaming game, or more like using cloud computing? And again, those kinds of specifics, I don't know, but I think it's going to be like it's using cloud computing. And I mean, it's Kojima. Like, he's the guy that like helped oversee Boktai, a game you had to play outside so you could get the sunlight on the little sensor on the back of your Game Boy Advance cart so that you could fight vampires. I think he's probably going to bring some of that Kojima energy. He's the guy that like wanted everybody to disarm their nukes in their own copy of Metal Gear Solid 5, so that everyone could achieve global peace and unlock a cutscene for everybody in the game. Expect that sort of thinking, but applied directly to the cloud. And I don't think that means like, oh, it's going to be streaming in from the cloud necessarily. I think some data will be streaming in from the cloud, like Flight Sim. But again, this is just me speculating because no one knows. There anything swirling about who the Japanese studio working on Silent Hill is? Not that I've heard. Back when that first broke, and this is from Not Bothered. Back when that first broke, my assumptions were either Kojima or the Siren team at Japan Studio, but both those look pretty unlikely now, huh? Yeah, those are both pretty unlikely. Yes, they're unlikely. From Clovey, per your understanding for Kojima, would this deal mean a Microsoft exclusive game or just a multi-platform game that is mainly developed for Xbox? I'm pretty sure this would be an exclusive Microsoft game. We could talk about this a little bit. This is something I mentioned on the Bombcast, but Microsoft has looked at the cost-benefit analysis for making games multi-platform and versus making them exclusive versus like timed exclusivity. They've looked at a bunch of different scenarios, and this was obviously pertaining to Bethesda, but they looked at the one that was the games are exclusive to Microsoft forever, to Game Pass basically forever, and they're like, okay, listen, we see how much money we're losing here, and that losing that money is not that much different than like spending money to acquire users for Game Pass. Like, it's in that range, like over a matter of like 5 years. And so we're just going to make things exclusive because it makes the most sense for what our end goal here is. And I think that when they're doing a publishing deal like this, they're going to kind of come to that same conclusion. What is Epic doing with that $1 billion they raised? From Paul W. Graham. I don't know, probably going to fight Apple again or something. I don't know. I don't know. They make a lot of money from Fortnite. What do they need $1 billion for? You know, this is like, it's just upfront money to like probably hire a lot of people, build a studio out there. Like they bought that mall, so like, they're gonna spend like $1 billion like buying hardware to fill out that mall so that people can get to work on stuff. And then it's probably gonna be building out new teams dedicated to specific, you know, different verticals for Unreal. They've built a real big relationship with Hollywood, but they probably want to make sure that they are cementing themselves in place there, and they'll probably use a lot of that money to do that. Yeah. What, if anything, have you heard about a potential Legacy of Kain remake / remaster? This is from Shoto Drag. So when I first heard the name Omen, which was the code name for Redfall, I was like, and I actually saw an early image of it. It was blurry, and there was like a bat flying in front of the moon, and there was these two creatures down at the bottom that kind of looked like they could be like Kain or something, and it obviously was not that. It was a blurry image, but I'm like, the name Omen, like, it all like fit in my head. I'm like, but that doesn't make any sense. No one involved owns that IP, so what is happening here? Obviously that's not what it was. So beyond my own wild imagination, I've not heard anything about Legacy of Kain remake or remaster. I hope it does. I hope it happens soon, but I have not heard much about it. Okay, let's keep going. I'm seeing chat up here. How's chat doing? You guys having fun? We figuring this out? We coming up with some news? All right. Transfaring 2 says PM Xenos for what we should expect from the cloud gaming tech in Kojima's new game. And please, I would love that. All right. Scrolling around the questions. Okay, from Iridium. Didn't they already try cloud-based stuff with Crackdown and it was a big disaster? Yes and yes. Absolutely. Yeah, I think they're in a different place now than they were when they announced Crackdown 3, right? So they've done some more cloud-based stuff. I think, you know, I mentioned Flight Sim, but Flight Sim's a good example. Like they said, if that was on disk or if it was on your hard drive, it would be like a petabyte of information, or like some multiple zettabytes or something like that. It'd be a huge amount of data, but they could just stream that stuff in from the cloud. And I think, you know, that's a really smart and obvious use for that, where it's like, okay, now we can make you fly around the whole Earth in a way that was never possible before. I think if you say like that sentence to Kojima, light bulbs start going off, and he just goes wild, like, the entire Earth, huh? And then you have to, like, he's just going to go wild from there. So they're building off of what they did with Flight Sim and not what they failed with Crackdown. Although I'm sure those failures will inform how this works. But I mean, that's why they brought in Kim Swift, right? Kim Swift is specifically here to be someone who worked at Stadia, understands the pitfalls, has worked with studios already dealing with these challenges. They didn't ship a whole lot, but she at least understands better than most people on Earth. Like, first of all, she made Portal and Left 4 Dead. Like, she oversaw those games. So she knows how to make and ship a game, and she knows how to work with the cloud. They'll figure this stuff out. And now Microsoft has some positive examples with Flight Sim, so it'll probably be a lot better than what happened with Crackdown. But you're not wrong. They've tried some of this stuff before, and it didn't go well. All right, let me scroll back down. Hey, it's Louis Patelli. It's my buddy here. I'm just here to support GrubbSnax and the GrubbSnax only. Congrats on the new show. Thank you, Louis Patelli. I appreciate that. He said I could set his name like that, all right? This is not me going out of line here. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Anyone else scared that Sony is cracking down on leaks after NAFTA? Sony, I've heard a little bit that Sony's like kind of, yeah, like if you sort of don't, if you're not just if you're the source of leaks, but if like you are, I don't know, if you like publish something early, or if something gets out and it involves your game, they might like not let you in their next showcase. Now, personally, I don't think that's a big deal. Some people hear that and they're like, oh, Sony's like, ruling with an iron fist. And I'm just like, they think it's very important to protect leaks, and if you're the source of a leak, they don't, you know, they're going to take it seriously. One of the reasons why I've sort of backed off on that stuff, because I don't want to be the reason someone gets in trouble on those things. But and you know, I think it's reasonable. If you're a company who wants to control that stuff, then that's your purview. I think that's okay. Yeah, I got Yappa Panda. I did speak about this, the series of Kotaku articles about Sony and indies. I wrote about it a little bit myself on GamesBeat, and then I talked about it at the beginning of this episode. One of the first questions was about that. Any knowledge on the WB situation? What happened with those studios? We answered that one. Any further news on Breath of the Wild 2? Thank you. No new news. I'm just very much in the camp that game is probably barely going to make 2022 and could very easily, I mean, everyone thinks that game could slip into 2023. From Stewie, is the Kojima letter of intent, which is something I reported on early in the episode if you're just joining us, that Microsoft and Kojima have signed a letter of intent for a publishing deal between the two, and Stewie's asking, is that for a single game or does it imply a longer term arrangement? That the letter of intent, as far as what I can confirm, I don't know one way or the other to answer your question. There are some other things that I've heard unconfirmed that make me think there will be a longer term arrangement. But let's just wait. Like, that's just kind of where I'm leaning right now. It's a gut feeling, so don't go write that into a news story, anybody. But I'll look into that more. We'll come back. We'll talk about it and see if there's anything more to that. But there's a chance that there could be something longer term happening there. Octavius, Nintendo Switch Pro just isn't real, right? You know what? That should be this is the first episode of GrubbSnax. Let's plant our flag in the ground right now. Nintendo Switch Pro is fake, just like Elden Ring was. Now that Integrate is out, when should we expect news about Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2? This is a tough one because we know that Final Fantasy 16 is like close, right? We're probably going to hear about, I think if there's a Sony event in July or August, we're going to hear a lot about Final Fantasy 16. Does that leave room for Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2? I don't know, maybe, but I doubt it. Do you think that the Kojima thing is Microsoft still trying to get into the Japanese market, or are they done with that now? So there's a couple things here. This is a good question, Sean, baby. Excuse me. Microsoft is well aware of the stats and the data coming out of Japan. People during the pandemic in Japan played way more video games than ever. Most of that was on the phone, but Microsoft has an inkling that they can make Game Pass work on the phone for the Japanese audience. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. I don't necessarily think so, but I don't have, vision. I don't have, so whatever. But to me, when it comes to the Kojima deal specifically, and I think I wrote this originally when I announced this deal, that Kojima was central to Microsoft's strategy to leverage Japanese talent, I think is how I wrote it. And my point there was that Microsoft sees a lot of value in bringing Japanese games into Game Pass on a global scale. They see that there is a lot of hunger among gamers for Japanese games in America and North America and Europe. People really like Dragon Quest XI did very well, I think, in Game Pass. I think Octopath Traveler, I think, did very well in Game Pass. And I think Microsoft wants to ensure that they have a good pipeline, because we see what happens, like that Falcom news recently, where all those games are getting ported to Switch, PlayStation, and PC, and no mention of Xbox. Microsoft doesn't want to miss out on stuff like that going forward. That's why they've been so heavily working with Sega to get Yakuza, and now Sega is in love with Game Pass. Sega's having a really good relationship with Game Pass, but it's not about necessarily winning over Japan and succeeding in Japan. They think there's a possibility there. They think it's possible, but that's not the primary goal. The primary goal is to make Game Pass appealing to gamers everywhere, and they think Japanese games can really help with that, and they think Kojima will really help with that as well. I think by saying Kojima's there, it's another big reason why Kojima's a big deal everywhere, and they want to leverage that part of things. The other reason I said that sentence about Kojima being central is Kojima's like the biggest thing Microsoft's doing in Japan right now, and that's a way of saying they're not acquiring Japanese studios right now. Those deals just aren't in the works. I imagine that they think if this Kojima deal goes well, maybe they can use that as a springboard to prove that they work well with Japanese companies. And I do believe that the laws for Western companies investing in Japanese studios has been pulled back a little bit in last year, I think it was. So maybe the window opens up for them there, and that they do start getting more studios, and then that makes them more appealing to Japan. But to me, it's much more about everywhere else and using the talent in Japan and enabling them to keep making console games and not forcing those studios to have to retreat to mobile, which many of them don't want to do. All right, so we're at an hour now. I'm still feeling pretty good. I say, well, let's keep answering some questions. I'm having a good time with everybody. I hope everybody's enjoying the show. It's GrubbSnax. If you're just tuning in now or recently, I started with some news about, what was it? Yeah, Dead Space, kind of confirmed some of the reporting there, and Kojima and Microsoft signing a letter of intent. That will be in the VOD, and the best way to catch up on the show is to go to giantbomb.com/upgrade and join the premium, so you'll be able to watch this show in the future and be able to watch all the VODs as they come forward. Okay. I want to answer at least a couple more questions. Let's see if there's any good ones. You know what I'm going to do? I know a lot of people sending questions already. I'm going to scroll to the top. And if you want your question answered again, you have my permission to hit that button again and send it in a second time, and I'll try to answer it, because that way I know you're serious about to get it answered, or maybe it's something I already answered, and so you're like, oh, I don't need to actually ask it again. So let's do this. From Dominito, does Sony have an answer to Game Pass? I think that Sony is in a strong position to keep just doing what it's doing, and it's working fine for Sony, and it doesn't, and it should not answer Game Pass. I think right now it should not try to answer Game Pass. If it tries to follow Microsoft down that path, it will not be able to do it as well. It doesn't have enough money. It doesn't have the infrastructure in terms of like supporting that stuff on the cloud. They don't have enough studios at this point, like, to go head to head, and they don't want to. And what's working, and here's a point that I think gets missed a lot with this stuff, is it's not just about what Sony and Microsoft want. You actually have to listen to what the fans are saying. And because Microsoft is doing Game Pass, Sony fans are very much like, don't do that. We specifically don't want you to be like Microsoft. Keep being Sony, keep making these giant games, and we're going to support them. We're going to go wild for these games. I think, like we saw Returnal. I think Returnal got turned into a big hit because a lot of PlayStation Sony fans proved that, or we're trying to prove that, hey, we will buy this game for $70. This is a game that we think is this is what we want. We don't want the stuff that's going in Game Pass. Don't be Microsoft. And so, because Microsoft exists and is doing this stuff over here, it creates an opportunity for Sony to be different. Sony just has to embrace that and keep going down its own path, and it's doing that. I think Sony fully understands this stuff. I don't think anything I'm saying is going to be a newsflash to Jim Ryan. I think he fully appreciates this and is trying to do that, and that's why instead of investing in PlayStation Now, they're investing in PlayStation Plus and making people feel good about that stuff, and just kind of giving away last gen big blockbusters to people who get a PlayStation 5 and PlayStation Plus. They're going their own way, and they're going to keep doing that. And the way that they're looking to make more money, according to Jim Ryan, and that big thing that big prospectus he sent out to investors a couple weeks ago, is we're going to put more games on PC. We're going to spend more of our first party budget on live service games, and we're going to do more stuff on mobile. That's where they're looking for their growth, and none of that has to do anything with a Game Pass response. And to me, that makes the most sense. I would not, if I were them, I would not be trying to compete directly with Game Pass. From apathetic man, is VR dead? I've used this analogy before, but what the hell? Do you remember It? You remember It before it was announced as the Segway? That's what VR kind of felt like to me, where before VR kind of got out there, we were getting all hyped up, and we're like, it was going to change the world, and it was going to change the world. And then it gets announced, and it's a scooter you stand on, and businesses bought a lot of them. It worked a lot for Enterprise. Enterprise used a lot of it for like their security guards, or for like renting to people at a theme park or whatever. And VR is exactly the same, where it was hyped up, it was going to change the world. Most people didn't buy it, but theme parks bought it, and people, you could go rent them at locations, and businesses in Enterprise are using it. And now where's the Segway? I think they shut it down. I think VR probably won't get shut down. It will morph and continue to change into new display technologies and new ways of interfacing with computers. But it's definitely, VR is not an endpoint. It's not an endpoint. It's a step along the way, and we'll figure out what's next. Okay. From ETT, do you think the meme slash GameStop slash AMC stock hype will spill over into gaming stock? It's something I've been wondering. The most gaming stocks are not being shorted right now. That's a big that's the big issue. That's a key thing there. We don't have to spend a lot of time on this. I think either you care about this stuff or you don't. And if you don't care about anything. Like, you don't even understand what I'm saying right now. That's not a judgment. I don't blame you. But yeah, I think the key thing is, like, many of those stocks are kind of exactly where investors expect them to be, and like no one's really shorting EA, so you kind of can't go and meme stock EA because you need to be able to short squeeze those sellers, and that's just not an option. From Giggy, is Game Pass on Switch a dead wish? You know, Phil still wants it. He still wants that. Phil Spencer from Xbox, the boss of Xbox, still wants to get Game Pass everywhere. I think he is working the long game. I think he is trying to make Microsoft invaluable to these companies and saying, hey, we're going to provide your cloud infrastructure. We're going to make that work really well for you. Come and partner with us on that stuff. And then hopefully they can sort of parlay that into the next step and then the next step, and then say, hey, come on, we're so close. Like, let's get Game Pass on here. We already have a bunch of deals in place. We'll give you a really good deal, give you a good cut on all the stuff that we make from this. Let's just make it happen. I think he sees that future. Whether or not that's possible is I have no idea. What's up with the new BioShock? I don't know. Last I heard it's still coming along, and but I don't think we're going to hear about it anytime too soon. I haven't looked into it too closely recently. It was kind of that same thing where we got all of those 2K announcements leaked, and I'm like, okay, so this is what they have now. That BioShock thing is probably just going to be something we hear about later, and so I didn't look into it too closely. I'll look around, and if there's anything interesting, I'll come back with that in the next couple of weeks. Do you think Respawn will make another VR game? No. They were kind of, they started that VR game before EA acquired them. So they had to see it through, and it took a lot of work to like get Oculus to agree to even make that game a modern Medal of Honor game. Because like EA's like, well, we gotta make it something of ours. We own this studio, like just let us do that. And it took a lot of work to get them to agree to that. And they don't want to, like that was a hassle. And I don't think EA has a lot of like, they're not looking around a lot of IP like, oh, we need to make that a VR game. Okay. Probably going to start wrapping up soon, but I'm still looking at some questions. We're still going to go for a little bit longer. If anyone's got a hot question, be sure to ask it. Durfeef, is Dino Crisis really dead? I doubt it's dead. I think Capcom will eventually get to a point where the Dino Crisis games make some sense to bring back. Maybe I'm overlooking something there, but I think they'll do at least one. Because it seems like the RE engine is I think they're very adept, adroit at using that engine, and I think once they get through Resident Evil, it'll be like, hey, we can make that happen pretty quickly. Let's just give it a shot. And who knows, if it takes off, they have like another franchise they can start building on. Oh, BioWare thank you, Final Death. BioWare just announced it won't show Dragon Age or Mass Effect at EA Play. I had not heard one way or the other on that. So that's okay. That's cool to know. It's good to know. Not cool. I think people are going to be disappointed. I was wondering, like, they couldn't just show more CG for Dragon Age, right? Thank you for that, Final Death. So good looking out. They couldn't just show more CG from that. They've done sort of those teases in the last couple of years. I guess they could have, because we've only seen like still assets, right? Or like assets like revolving around the camera, that sort of thing. They probably could have done a CG teaser for like what the game actually is now and gotten away with it. So maybe, they are just coming off of Mass Effect. That's the thing. Creating that sort of asset takes time, it takes money, it takes planning, and they're just coming off of Mass Effect Legendary Edition. They are still working within a pandemic world. And why spend that money when next year, or maybe at the Game Awards, they've shown up to the Game Awards a bunch of times. Maybe at the Game Awards they could show up and say, hey, no, here's some actual gameplay of Dragon Age. I think that could work for them. So, okay. Good to know. Good to know that that's the situation with those games. So I guess that means it's going to be a lot of Dead Space and a lot of Skate 4, huh? Maybe they'll bring Pele on the stage. I hope Pele's not dead. I don't know. I hope Pele's not dead when I said that. From Nida Mac. I'm sorry about these names, everybody. Love the new show, Jeff. Thank you so much. Have you heard anything about movement on bringing back NCAA football with new NIL rules going into effect? Any idea of when it will be back? So, don't know what the NIL rules are. I love college football, so I should figure this out. But I have heard. So I was when me and Mike on our podcast were teasing Dead Space, and he said dead. Like, if we're not dead first. When I kind of felt bad that we so explicitly teased it, I'm like, let's pretend we're talking about NBA Live. And then I'm like, hey, I should check and see if NBA Live's in production before I start making those jokes. And it's not. It's not in production because the team is focused on NCAA and basketball, or NCAA and not basketball, and golf. So the football game and golf, and there's one other, but I can't remember what that studio does. But the new ones are golf and NCAA football. So they're focused on it. It seems like they're intent on getting that stuff out soon. I don't know if that means we hear about it at this EA Play or whatever, or one of these EA Play events before the main EA Play. But it seems like it is well on its way to happening, much quicker than a revival of NBA Live. So thank you for that question. Got a little bit extra juice out of this show, huh? Okay, yeah, please bring us some AEW scoops. Kenny Omega is a noted friend of the site. Never mind last E3 from ex-Junon. Mike's played video games with him, so I'll get Mike to contact him for me, and we'll make that happen. Don't apologize for our names. We picked them. From Nihoj Salu. Should I kill the last tiny bit of hope I have of Persona 5 coming out on other platforms? Boy, Christian, I just don't know. No one knows. This is one you ask about it all the time, because what sense does this make? Why is this not on other things? They must have an exclusivity agreement with Sony. It doesn't seem like they have an exclusivity agreement with Sony. That means the other alternative is just poor management, I think, where they did not know that Persona would sell as well as it did on Steam, and then it way outsold the Vita version or whatever. And if you don't, it's like, we could have told you that. Just listen to us, please. And if they were to put these games on Switch, they would be massive hits. They would be multi-million sellers on Switch, no doubt. But why they're not happening, no idea. I could ask again. I don't think I'll find out. I think it's too embarrassing for it to leak out. I think that's honestly the answer. It's too embarrassing for them to actually ever let anyone find out why these things aren't on other platforms. Any chance on Dragon's Dogma 2 soon? So I think we know from the hack, which hacking's bad, but we know from the hack, the Capcom hack, that Dragon's Dogma 2 is on their calendar, or at least that it was at the time of the hack. And it's one of their next big games in terms of when you look forward to the future. But Capcom was just at E3 and they didn't announce it. So when we hear about it, I imagine that it's something we hear about maybe the Game Awards, maybe early next year. But it seems like it could still come out next year. And if that's the case, yes, we should hear about it soon. Soon as in months, many months. Any idea why it's going to take so long, 1 to 2 years, for the Trails games to be localized when they're paying Geofront to do it and they already did a high quality fan translation? I don't know. I wonder if part of that's just spacing these things out and part of a marketing thing. I honestly don't know. Sorry about that. Will we ever see Viva Pinata come to PC/Game Pass? It's not. That's a shame. I think so. I hope so. It's a kind of thing where it's oh, we should get around to that eventually, and they eventually do actually get around to it. What on earth happened to Deep Down? I don't know. It got sent to the Phantom Zone. I don't know. Here, let me take advantage of this Go XLR. It got sent to the
Phantom Zone.
I have no idea what that voice sounded like. Actually, I don't have my headset on, so I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I messed up there. All right. Tell us everything you know about the Bloodborne remake / PC port. Don't know much. I think it makes sense, right? The thing about this is, I think the Bloodborne remake / PC port is something that required the attention of FromSoft. And FromSoft had been very, very, very busy sort of like putting out fires with Elden Ring. And I think they might be at a point now where they can, if they're almost certainly working with another studio, but if they're working with another studio to actually do the port, I think From was required, but they might be at a point where they could provide that support and then send this other studio off to finish it. And so I think we're probably closer to it happening, but I don't know for sure. Sounded like Treebeard. Okay. Yeah, I got deep sixed. Okay. Let's do one more question. I'm gonna do one more question. And we got a good one, and then we'll wrap this up. This has been a lot of fun. I hope people are enjoying the show. This is a good time. Whose butt do I have to kiss for another lunar? I don't know, man. I'm not a JRPG guy. I'm sorry. I think you gotta get in there, do the legwork, and make it happen. Is anyone working on a new Def Jam game? I doubt it. No. Sorry. What fires with Elden Ring? I don't understand the question. If you want to ask a question, make sure you're using the Ask a Question button at the top, in case you missed that. But I see someone in the chat added me. Is Hello Games at a point where they feel comfortable releasing a paid expansion for No Man's Sky? Will that ever happen? I don't know if it will ever happen. I think that they see enough of a bump in sales from the base game every time that's been working for them, and that a paid expansion I think they might be worried it might spoil that, where people are like, well, yeah, I could buy the base game and got this free update now, but also there's an expansion I have to buy and that's still full price or something. I guess they could always release an all-encompassing version for like $10 more, and that's just the version people buy, and then still have the base version as like they could do the medium popcorn thing. You go to the movie theaters and the large version is large popcorn is $7.50 and the medium popcorn $7.25. So you're saying to yourself, only 25 cents, I'm gonna get the large, and you don't think about the fact that you're actually spending $7.50. So they could do that with No Man's Sky, where they still have that on Steam or wherever for $15, and then have a $20 version that has the DLC, and then people feel a little bit better about spending a little bit extra money because they're also getting extra content. They could do something like that. I don't know if they're in a place where they feel like they'll ever do that. All right. Blackheart Vinyl asks, Arby's? Apparently they're sending me something. I don't know what. They got my DMs yesterday and they're sending me something. So, I don't know. Know that I am an Arby's shill. Absolutely. Is Tommy Tallarico okay? I hope so. I hope so. I don't wish ill on him at all. He seems like an emotional, passionate guy, and I don't know if that's good or bad for what the Intellivision is going to turn into. In a battle of Jeffs, who would reign supreme? Probably Jeff. I was gonna say Jeff Lebowski, but that's a fictional character, so that's not a real person. Jeff Goldblum, or did he get canceled? I can't remember. Of the Jeffs here, listen, we work together, we collaborate, we are just in a fight against the Geoffs of the world, against Keeley. We have to do something about him. Rate this snacks, toffee popcorn. Yeah, that's gonna get a 4 out of 5. I love me some toffee popcorn. All right, everybody, I'm gonna start wrapping this up. Thank you for watching. Thank you so much. This is GrubbSnax. I'm Jeff Grubb. I write for GamesBeat. You can find more of me on Jeff Grubb on Twitter. I tweet too much, so don't actually follow me. I'm gonna do this show every week on Thursdays at 10 a.m. Pacific time, 1 p.m. Eastern. But if you want to watch the future episodes, you're going to need Giant Bomb Premium. To get that, go to giantbomb.com/upgrade. I guess you're thinking, hey, Jeff, does that mean you're going to lock down everything to Giant Bomb? No, this is about us having a conversation. If you want to participate in the conversation, that's what you're coming here for. And I think that it went really well. I think you all provide really good questions. and you provide stuff that's like, this is good stuff to riff on. And honestly, you guys like shook some stuff loose from my brain, like, oh, I can't remember now, but stuff like I think the stuff like NCAA getting worked on pretty actively right now. That's the kind of stuff that I think we can work on together, and that's what you're going to show up for. And I think it'd make a great idea if you kept doing that. But if you ever want to ask me a question on Twitter, feel free. If I'm not too busy, you can do that. I have a Discord, discord.gg/GameMess. You can ask me questions there. I'll do my best to answer most of the time. This is about us hanging out and us figuring out some of this stuff in a sort of a collaborative atmosphere. All right. I never let my hair down. I meant to do that before the show started. Give the people what they want. All right, I'm gonna wrap this thing up. I'm gonna try to go to the one because Dan Hour sent a new thing where the GrubbSnax logo gets bitten away, and I don't have the sound effect for that, or maybe I might have a sound effect built in. Actually, I didn't listen to it. I'm gonna try to go to that, and then that fades to black, and I'm gonna stop the recording. So thank you everybody for showing up. Come back next week. Let's have a good time, and have a good weekend. And yeah. Until then, goodbye. Here we go. Let's see if it's going to work.